Well, as we made most of the parts for this now, I've just got the pivot screws to make, and I've actually do have a bit of hex bar stock in stock, which will do nicely for the pivot screws. I thought I'd have a quick look at it and review where we are so far with it. And I've noticed a couple of problems with the plans straight away, actually. Yeah, and then the first thing that I noticed, I was looking at the plans and looking at what I've done so far with it. Turn the light off a little bit so you can actually see what's on the paper. Yeah, the plans call for the crankshaft to be 1.75 inches. And I was looking at this, and even with my crap maths, I was thinking, well, that doesn't actually add up, because the flywheel is 9/16, which is 0.563. Now, the bush, this bush here in the support, that is 3/4 of an inch exactly. So basically, you're going to need the thickness. The crankshaft is going to have to be to go through the flywheel. It's got to be the thickness of the flywheel, which is 0.563. It then needs to go all the way through this bushing, which is 3/4 of an inch, 0.75, and then it needs to protrude the other side by 1/4 of an inch for the thickness of the crank. Well, as you can see, I'll pop it in. It protrudes somewhat more than that, and it will do, because you add the figures up. That crankshaft there is 1.75 long, and it only needs to be, even if I hadn't reduced the thickness of the flywheel, which obviously I have on two sides, but even if it was the full thickness, it only needs to be 1.563 in length. Now, I've reduced the thickness of the flywheel in the middle, so that my flywheel in the middle is only a 0.36 thick in thickness. So basically, the crankshaft only needs to be, according to my maths, 1.36 long. So basically, what I've got to do, if we put it like that so you can see it, that will sit up against there like that. So obviously, we've got to reduce the, stand it up. There we go. Like that. So we need to reduce the length of the crankshaft considerably so that it sits flush with the end of the crank. Right, so that's the first problem. Now the second problem I can see is that when we've got the crank in place, which sits flush with the bush there, like that, it's obviously sitting proud of the main support by 1/8 of an inch. But the lever, the pivot lever, will be flush up against, let's move it this way a bit so you can see it, the main support. So straight away you can see a mismatch. This needs to be there, like that, in line with the crank, so that when we put the con rod in place, it fits perfectly. So this needs to sit proud of this support by the same amount that the bush protrudes at the top. There's another slight inaccuracy in the plan. I mean, none of this is a major problem. It means that the pivot pin that I use on here to, let's move the corner out of the way, the pivot pin that I use to hold the lever to the main body will have to be longer, because it's got to stick out a little bit further. And I also need to create a small bushing so that it will space the lever crank off of the main body exactly the same amount that the crank is spaced off of the main body, and then it will all line up. But it is interesting that the plans don't show this at all. Yeah, so that's where we are at the moment. So I've got to shorten the crankshaft, and I've got to make a small bushing washer, thick washer, effectively for the bottom pivot, and then I've also got to make the pivot screws. So I just thought, I'd bring you up to speed on that, because obviously, I've been following the plans as best I can, and there are some inaccuracies on them. Should you be making this, should you decide to make one of these yourselves? Right, let's get on and make a few bits.